It's a slippery slope, mate. It is a slippery slope.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I discussed
coming.
this with you. We're going to change gears here because the last 3 or 4 months, and I've used this argument myself. And I was walking the dog the other day, and I was thinking about the slippery slope argument. Now, when I say the slippery slope argument, forgetting about all the things you've said, do you know what I mean when I say the slippery slope argument?
My interpretation is that if you were going to change something, or like rules are in place and it goes against what's currently in place, and I use this as an argument, you've got to be really careful, because if we open that door, it's like Pandora's box. There's no closing it. And if it's like, if you give an inch to something, I'm allowed to do this. Oh no, you're allowed to, slap women across the face like that. That's okay. Well, then it becomes a hard slap. Then it becomes a punch. Then I'm allowed to beat you up. It's like so it's a slippery slope. If you open up a rule for something, that inch can turn into a mile. So, and I use that a lot.
See, I'm starting to think, and I will just again, I've used this argument before. I'm going to stop personally because I think you can make arbitrary lines. So it's almost like saying, like if I was dating somebody and they were to say, and I were to shake their hand and they were to say, look, if I shake your hand, that's a slippery slope. Next thing you know, I'll be having to give you a blowjob. And I don't want to make that jump from handshake to blowjob. We can definitely we can definitely cut a line, that handshake's fine, blowjob, not okay. And that's a bit of a straw man. It's a bit of, to be fair, it's a bit of a straw man argument I'm making. However, I think you can make arbitrary lines on what is and is not acceptable without saying it's a slippery slope. I think you can say no to some things and yes to others. And we've heard this argument come up between you and I've used it too when we talk about government involvement and we talk about freedom. And it's always around freedom, it's and that's the only time I hear this argument is it's a slippery slope. Guns. It's a slippery slope. You take our automatic weapons and next you're going to take our handguns. No, it's not. No, that was the one thing that made me think this slippery slope argument is doesn't really have much merit in a lot of situations because you can take someone's automatic weapons but not take their handguns. Is that really a slippery slope?
So I think you've made a great point overall, mate, to be honest, because it really does depend on the context of what you're talking about. The blowjob in particular, that really hit home.
I knew it. I thought about that.
Struck a chord with me.
Yeah.
I think that, so a lot of the context that I come from is habit formation because it's something that I've studied and I love it. I'm really fascinated with it. The slippery slope is massive in habit forming because I'm just gonna have half a cookie. That is, it's habit defining. So could you actually have half a cookie and be fine? Of course you could. There are people that are strong enough to do that. The vast majority of the public aren't. And that when you break a rule for yourself in that format, it will normally lead to something else and going down that path.
Yeah.
But it's exactly the same point as you bring it up. And there's a lot of crossover with we should not legalize marijuana because it's a gateway drug. And if you smoke marijuana, you'll be injecting heroin in your arm next week.
Yeah.
And
it's a slippery slope, mate.
This is the thing. This is where you come up because there is, I think it's much more nuanced than that. The slippery slope argument is not fundamentally good or bad. It's dependent on the context that it's in. And when you're talking about suppressing freedom of speech and suppressing freedom of actions in certain kinds or government intervention, now I'm going to stand firm and I'm going to be, look, you've got to be really careful with what you're saying there. Because when you start shutting people up, who are you to say what you can shut me up on? And when can you start and stop that? And if it's government intervention, who are you to say that what I can and can't do for my benefit? You don't know me. And actually, I've got several other examples which I actually feel are arguably equal, if not more important, for the health of those well-being for those people and everything else. So that's when I'm going to really give you the slippery slope, and I'm going to stand behind that statement. But you're right; like it is not. You can't just say slippery slope for everything. It really does depend on what you're talking about, mate. So I'm in agreement with you, and I'm not on certain topics. I absolutely fundamentally think you need to stand by it.
Yeah, I think in the two contexts, there's a usage where you're not using it to prove a point. You're using it to set up an example where there's some evidence to back it up. So I worry that if I take this away, then this will happen because this has happened in this instance.
Because of history. Yeah.
Whereas it's not, that's not the reason you're not doing it. That's just sort of the metaphor that you're laying. Whereas sometimes the slippery slope argument is used to shut down any further dialogue, a lot of times anymore. So if we get rid of handguns, or sorry, if we get rid of automatic guns, it's a slippery slope. The next thing you know, and right there, that to me is like, okay, well, no, that's not an argument. You just saying it's a slippery slope doesn't make it a quote slippery slope. That doesn't mean that's going to happen. And I think you're right to say that there's a lot of context and nuance that goes into when you use slippery slope. But I find it anymore to be a bit of a cop-out argument. Not the way you've used it, and I'm not criticizing you. I've heard it a lot, and there's times where I've heard it as a bit of a cop-out argument, because that is something how we're going to end the conversation and say, I'm not doing this because it could lead to that. Well, no, it doesn't have to. You know, tell me why you think it has to lead that way. Because maybe I have an argument to say, well, no, this is how I can safeguard this and this. You can, you know, weed is a good example of that. A lot of times weed usage or marijuana usage, I don't know why I'm calling it weed. What am I, like 12? But marijuana usage, it's not, you know, I think if anything, there's evidence that shows that now that it doesn't necessarily lead to increased usage of heroin. And, you know, that slippery slope is not necessarily a bad thing. So it was something I wanted to raise. It was just something in my head that I wanted to share with you and get your thought.
No, because you mentioned this for the listeners. Sean mentioned this to me, and I was like, "Oh, this would be really interesting," because I really feel strongly about the slippery slope thing and habit formation, and say freedom of speech, and that actually we shouldn't be breaking those things. However, the context in which you've used it and brought it to the table, in that people using that as an argument, maybe as laziness, as lack of intelligence, or whatever it is, or lack of wanting to go into confrontation debate. I agree with you 100%, and we need to be wary of that. We definitely need to be asking questions and pushing the boundaries. I believe there are certain things which we've got to really listen, like freedom of speech, government intervention. There are examples everywhere. There are countless examples of where that has been abused, and we need to be really careful with that. And I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but
just on that example, because if, let's say, somebody used that slippery slope argument, and I want to go back to our incitement conversation, because for some reason that was the one that really sort of made me think about it, because there was a story that came out. So we were talking about Donald Trump at the time when when the riots took place.
Capitol Hill,
and his Twitter account was canceled. And that was a very popular slippery slope conversation. And the reason I was reminded of that was, you know, we were talking about incitement in public parks is illegal. And at one point, you could have used the slippery slope argument, let's say in the 1700s or 1800s, whenever that law first came into pass, that you couldn't just stand there and say, everybody go kill him. That's incitement. And you could say, well, that's a slippery slope. If you stop people from, you know, you could have said it at that point, even though we're now at a point where we think, no, that's a reasonable law. And I think I think every slippery slope argument can 100% be challenged. And I think if you, to the viewer, if you're going to argue with me and bring slippery slope to the table, and I'm not talking to you, Hugh, but I want you to listen. If you're going to bring slippery slope to the table, I want some evidence to back it up. I don't want that to be your end of argument.
I think a really fair
I would
point.
like our subscribers to keep an eye out for that. And if you find a slippery slope example that you think is relative, put it in the comments.